Welcome back to Right Answers Mostly, a podcast on what you didn't learn in history class, but you really wanted to. My name's Claire Donald.
And my name is Tess Bellomo.
Guys, we are joined in studio by a very special guest, a familiar guest. We have the one and only Ben Sheehan.
Thank you so much for having me. What a slight upgrade over Zoom.
Yeah, a slight.
Yeah, some of you guys may know that Ben was on our podcast two years ago. You were the first guest we ever had, and Claire and I were reminiscing.
Is that true?
Yes.
Yes. And
I didn't know that.
Ben, what a first guest to have. We were terrified.
Because, when you're just like, oh God, we're going to be talking about politics, and what if we sound dumb, and all the things that now I feel like Claire and I have a little bit more confidence with.
I cannot believe that was your first episode. You guys were so
honored.
good.
Oh, that is so
please.
kind.
It's true. I honestly, maybe I knew that, I forgot, but I did not think that was your first episode.
Well, it definitely was, and thank God you made us feel right at home. But one of the reasons why we were so nervous is because of your resume. I mean, you are a good friend of ours, but you are a best-selling author, former executive producer at Funny or Die, political commentator. So we were intimidated, to say the least.
Yeah. We're like, how does the election work?
Yeah.
Which is valid for all of us to still be asking, because there's so many unanswered questions.
Truly. And what a year, what an important year. So we are so excited to have you back.
Well, I'm thrilled to be back.
We are really excited about this episode. We're going to try to get through as many questions as possible. And like we said, there are no silly questions.
Which is the theme for us at RAM. That is the heart of our show, is to ask the dumb questions, to not know everything and to learn together.
Yeah,
so,
and we just all want to feel as informed as we can. And that's why we're doing this. And, it's only a couple more months until some big things are going to be happening. And so we just want to make sure that everyone feels really empowered by the choices that they make and the vote that they choose to make. And that's all we can do, really.
Truly.
Can I make some of the Rammies feel a little bit better about any lack of civic or political knowledge that they may have or feel that they have?
Please.
I just want to point out that in the last 20 years, our schools have drastically cut civics and government classes. So only 8 states require a year of civics or government at some point between kindergarten and 12th grade. If you compare that to our parents, maybe grandparents' generation, after World War II, there were literally, you had American government, U.S. history, foundations of democracy, civic classes all throughout our school system, and over time those have gone away, and especially in the last 20 years. So if you don't know this information, it's not your fault, because we don't teach it nearly as much as we used to. So that's what, so no dumb questions, it's you weren't given this knowledge, and you should not feel bad about that.
Why were they cut?
So I have my conspiratorial
bent,
and I have
Rammies love conspiracy.
my evidence base. I'll start with the evidence base, and then I can go to conspiracy. My evidence based reason is because in 2002, with No Child Left Behind, this was a law that was passed by George W. Bush and Congress at the time, and I think it had good intentions. It was to really emphasize reading and math, and just get our test scores up across the country and make sure everyone across the country is really good at reading and math. And so they introduced new standardized testing to measure that. So we could say we're better than Norway or whatever the fuck. Can I swear on this?
Oh,
okay.
Please.
Whatever the fuck country you want to compare, so we can say whatever. And so as a result of that, states could actually shut down schools if they did not perform well enough consistently on these new standardized testing. And so I would be curious if there are any teachers listening or Rammies with parents who are teachers, but there was definitely this emphasis in many public schools across the country to teach to reading and math, and so other subjects kind of got deprioritized. This was re-emphasized in 2010 with Common Core. It was when President Obama reauthorized No Child Left Behind as the Every Student Succeeds Act in 2015. Reading and math, and it's there are other subjects
history
besides that. And so I think teachers and schools administrators felt pressure to because school could be shut down if they did not perform well enough. And so all these other subjects kind of got crammed, or it's we'll do social studies, we'll put a little bit of this and a little dish, and it's just this recipe. And this thing that was not only a huge part of our education in the 40s, 50s, 60s, but was actually the impetus for starting public education in this country, was to get people to be good citizens and understand how government works, and so we could participate as a citizen, as a member of government. And so we've definitely fallen far from that. My conspiratorial bent is that after the end of World War II, as I mentioned, there were all these classes. What happened 15 years after that? We had the civil rights movement. You had, I don't think it was an accident that you had 4 constitutional amendments in 10 years. You had the Voting Rights Act, the Civil Rights Act, the March on Washington, the Vietnam War protests. an unbelievable amount of like citizen engagement that followed really robust civic education in schools. I don't have any evidence that what people were like, oh shit, maybe we're giving people too many tools and knowledge and power. But, you know, a lot of the people that made change back then are probably the same age as a lot of the Rammies listening to this.
Yeah.
People in their late teens, early 20s, mid 20s. And I think that maybe there was less of a priority going forward. I don't have any evidence for this. I am not saying that it's real, but I just find it very suspicious that we had this amazing period of civic education, amazing period of action based on that, and then it kind of got chipped away. And so that's my theory. I don't have evidence, but it's in my gut.
Yeah, according to conspiracy theory, it's like they're giving us more problems if they're more educated. But also that makes so much sense because I remember in elementary school when we were going to take the benchmark test, which is like one of those tests, and teachers panicking and being like, guys, what? I should be panicking. I'm taking the test. But they were all freaking out. And that makes sense now because the school could be shut down.
It is crazy. Like, we're such a competitive little country, aren't we?
Yeah, we
like
really
standardized testing that's like a whole nother
We
problem.
gotta beat the Balkans at fucking
yeah, just like
some test.
What?
I don't know. It's
At everything.
weird. Yeah.
Okay, well let's get through some of these questions.
Yes, because we
have
had
a lot.
Yes, our followers on our Instagram at Right Answers Mostly wrote in. Make sure to follow us there. Take it away, Tess.
All right. Well, a lot of you asked about the Electoral College, and that is a big one to start out with, but we thought let's just get into it because there's a lot of like sub questions after that. So Ben, what is the Electoral College? Why do we use it? And how can we get rid of it?
Well, I have to mention that I am going to be doing a show coming up that this is episode 1 is all about the Electoral College. So this is very top of mind. We shot it a couple days ago. I'm excited to announce it in next couple of weeks. But the Electoral College kind of happened by accident. So we're going to go way back to all those white dudes at the Constitutional Convention in 1787, right? So everyone's trying to figure out how to pick the president. So some people proposed, why don't we have Congress pick the president? And they're like, that's a great idea. And then they go, well, we need the president to be able to like veto laws coming out of Congress if they're bad laws. Maybe the president would like not veto bad laws if he's relying on Congress or she's relying on Congress for their job. So like, okay, that's not a great idea. Then they go, well, why don't we have state legislatures pick the president and the people who write laws in every state? And they're like, well, maybe they're going to pick a weak president because they want to have the power. And so they'll pick somebody who's a pushover and then, you know, they can't stop states from doing crazy stuff. They go, okay, whatever. And then they're like, well, why don't we do a popular vote? And some people at the convention were like, no, because people are stupid and they're uninformed and they're not going to know who would be a good national leader. You know, we didn't have cell phones and Twitter and everything like back then. No one knew in Georgia who wasn't, you know, a member of like the elite or whatever, somebody from Massachusetts with a good resume. Like the information traveled very slowly. So they were like, that's a bad idea. We don't want to make that happen. So basically a bunch of people got together near the end of the convention and were like, all right, we got to figure this out. Like, so they kind of combined all three of these as a way to kind of please everyone. And the ultimate thing that they added in at the end is that, you know, in the northern states and the southern states, there was about the same amount of total people, but fewer eligible voters in southern states because of the slave population. So if it was a popular vote, southern states would never go along with that because they had way fewer eligible voters than northern states. So they concocted this electoral college where instead of, you know, Congress people picking the president, it's a bunch of electors who have no job, political power, other than just they vote for president and then they leave and then they don't have their power anymore. The people who make laws in each state, they get to decide how we choose these electors. So today in every state, that's a popular vote. But back then it was our state house members or state senators. They just chose the electors and we didn't vote for president at all. For the first several decades, we didn't get to vote for president. Yes.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So it's only been, I think it was maybe one state. I think it was just South Carolina after like 1828. And then since 1880, every state has had a popular vote for president. But for the first several decades, many, many states did not let people vote for president. We don't have the right to vote for president, actually, in our country. Like, we don't have the right to fundamentally
not
vote.
in the Constitution.
Correct. State constitutions say, okay, we're going to use a popular vote to pick the electors, but like we don't have the like. If we're in California, like I don't think they're going to, but like our state legislature could be like, you know what? Instead of you guys voting, we're going to do this. So like the state house members and the state senators in Sacramento could be like, we're going to pick the electors. We're going to take away that vote. They're not going to, but the Supreme Court in 2000 did say in the Bush v. Gore that state legislatures can take that power back at any time. People would revolt, like if that happens, you know, like whatever state it happens in.
That would be bad.
So it was this like mixing together, and like the compromise being okay, and then if they want to have a popular vote, they can. So it's like legislatures, popular vote, you know, avoiding Congress. So like they cobbled together this system, but they were worried about a few things, like small states, you know, not having power, and so like this gave them a little bit of power because electoral votes are based on the number of U.S. senators and U.S. representatives you have in your state. So like here in California, I believe we have 52 members of Congress and obviously 2 senators because every state has that. So we have 54 electoral votes. Every state has to have at least 3 electoral votes because they have 2 senators and 1 member of Congress. So like super small states like Wyoming, the ratio of like population to electoral vote is like about 190,000 people per 1 electoral vote. In Texas, it's like 760,000 per 1 electoral vote.
So they're just trying to make it even.
So they're trying to but what they actually did is they ended up giving smaller states a little bit more power because of that minimum 3 electoral votes, no matter how many people in the state.
And different in the South specifically?
No, I mean, that was across the country. It didn't matter. Every state has at least 3. But the compromise that was made to southern states was that, so we have, obviously, every state has 2 senators. Every state has a different number of representatives depending how many people. So some states like Alaska, Delaware have only 1 person, and we in California have 52 because we're the biggest state. So different states have obviously more electoral votes based on that. So because it's based on the number of representatives each state has, we have to go back to how we used to count the population to decide that. And how we used to count the population in the beginning of this country is that free people counted as 1. People who were working for a fixed amount of time, so like indentured servants, if you had, you owed somebody 10 years of labor or whatever, like you counted as 1. Native Americans didn't count as anything. And all other persons, aka slaves, counted as 3/5 of a person. So when tallying up the population, states got some representatives in the House just based on their total slave population. And that translated to electoral votes. So like early on, Virginia, I think, I'm not positive about these numbers, but it was the biggest state. It had like 12 electoral votes. And I think 3 of those were just based on its total enslaved population. So southern states were like, well, if we have a popular vote, we're going to have way fewer voters. But if you do it like this, we get to count our population, get more electoral votes. And obviously those people can't vote.
I just think it's so important that people know that this system is like based on something so sinister still, like at the root of it that we're using today.
It definitely, that was a part of it for sure.
Right.
It wasn't the only thing.
Okay.
They also wanted to give small states more power and like be fair to a smaller state versus a large state. But it was absolutely baked in, and a huge reason that southern states went along with the Electoral College is they were able to have votes based on people who could not themselves vote. And that wasn't exclusive to enslaved people. A lot of states didn't let women vote originally. I think New Jersey was the only state that let women vote in the beginning of this country for the first 20 years, I think, until 1807. And then and some states even let like free African Americans vote. And then by the early 1800s, most states had passed laws saying that only property owning white men could vote. So a lot of people in northern states too couldn't vote and still counted, but this was very much a concession that was made to southern states to get them to sign on to the Constitution. So that said, so that's what we had in the beginning. And by the way, originally electors didn't have to vote for like the winner of the popular vote, or they could do whatever they wanted. They were supposed to be like upstanding men of means and reputation who could just vote for whoever. But since 1828, the electors have mostly had to follow the popular vote in the state. there were some changes that happened between in 1824, the guy who won the most votes and the most electoral votes lost the election.
Wow.
So Andrew Jackson got the most popular votes across the country, and he got the most electoral votes, but he didn't get a majority. So you have to get more than half, more than 50%. So he got he got a plurality, more than anybody else, but not more than half. And so when that happens, it goes to a runoff in the House of Representatives. And every state gets one vote. So all 52 representatives from California share one vote. The one person from Delaware gets one vote. So like,
for them.
again, a compromise to smaller states, right?
Yeah.
So it's like crazy.
Oh, that sucks for Andrew.
Yeah.
I would be
So he wasn't a great guy. We don't have to go into that, but like,
if that's your story.
but it's true. And so they picked John Quincy Adams, and so Andrew Jackson was like, "Fuck this! Like this sucks! Like I won both votes and I lost the election."
Things you can't get over in your life, you know.
So he went and like tried to get a bunch of states to change how they did the Electoral College, and he got a lot of states to do a popular vote in the state, like how we do today. And he also got a bunch of states to do for their political parties to put up like slates of electors, and so it effectively made it winner take all. And so originally it was just, again, electors could vote for whoever they wanted. But since for the last 200 years, it's been most states do a popular vote, and those electors have to follow the popular vote. Although in some states they don't.
Which state?
We want to get in Pennsylvania, in Georgia.
Is it the swings?
In New Hampshire. No, those are just it's
just like
13 states don't have laws saying like the elector has to follow the popular vote, which is kind of wild. But again, these are people who are like picked by the political party in the state. So you would have to do like a really good like long con on someone to be like, I'm a donor, I'm the governor of whatever, I'm, you know, a huge like active member of the political party, and then you get chosen as the elector and you're like, joke's on you bitches. Like I'm gonna
I wouldn't put it past some politicians.
I mean,
though.
there have been faithless elector votes. So there have been 165 in our history. They've never changed the outcome of an election, and most of them were because the person in 1872, like the guy who lost the election, he was like so upset that he died. Like it's not funny. It's not funny when people die. It's not funny. But when you go back and read the history books about this, it's really weird because they all say like he died from sadness, he died from heartbreak, and it's like they're very cagey about how he died.
Yeah, you're like, get into the details.
And it's like I feel like in our history books, it's like we read that and we're like, oh, back then people like died because they were bummed, and you're like,
just forlorn.
That's like if somebody got a news update that some celebrity died because they were bummed, you'd be like.
That's why
what are you talking about?
Oh yeah,
you know,
I was like, I can't go on.
Yeah, cannot go on.
So anyway, so he died after the election, but before the Electoral College actually voted. So they changed their votes. But other than that, the most electoral votes, like faithless votes in a single year, was 2016. 10 electors changed their vote. It didn't change the outcome of the election, but that's a ridiculously high number of people voting for someone other than the winner of their state.
It's hard to talk about 2016, isn't it?
Yeah, it really is.
So I don't know. I don't want to scare people. It's very unlikely.
Yeah.
It's very unlikely that an elector will not vote how their state votes, but is it possible? Yes.
So now, how does the Electoral College work? Like when, you know, the election's going to be here in November and we're watching the news and we're looking at all those numbers, like how can you explain that?
So between now and Election Day, November 5th, right? Every state political party. So like the Democratic Party of California, the Republican Party of California, the Green Party, the Libertarian Party, every party picks their slate of electors. So because California has 54 electoral votes, every party picks 54 people. If their party wins, if their candidate wins the popular vote in the state, those 54 people will get to be the electors, and they will get to actually vote for president and vice president. So that's every state has their slate, their names, whatever. And again, these are usually, they could be people. It can't be members of Congress. It can't be people in the federal government.
Really?
Yeah. So that was part of like the original agreement, right? Is like they were like, no, we're not going to have them as members of Congress. They're not going to be people who like work in the executive branch.
They could have interest in all of that.
Just to try to, because like, again, they were really concerned about like corruption and bribery and stuff like that. So they wanted it to be people that weren't like directly involved in the federal government. So it can't be people in the executive branch, can't be members of Congress, and it cannot be people who have engaged in insurrection, rebellion, or treason.
Oh, wow. That takes out a lot of people in this country lately, doesn't it? for the best, though. That's a good
So-
rule. That's a
But
good
not
So
rule.
yeah, so I mean, it is
Yeah.
a good one. They added those over time. So yeah, every political party picks their slate of electors, and then they wait and see how their state votes. And election day happens, right? Whoever wins the state, that candidate's political party's electors get to vote in the Electoral College, and the Electoral College actually takes place on the first Monday after on the first Tuesday after the second Wednesday in December. This is a real law.
Like the less chic first Monday of May.
Yeah.
I guess. I don't I mean, yeah. When you go back and read these, it's like the election day is the first Tuesday after the first Monday, and I can explain why that is. But like they just could have just picked a date.
Yeah,
You know, it's just like make it
easy.
easier. Like they have to be like. Anyways, I don't know. They were like high on their own supply. I don't know. I don't get it. But yes, now a law was passed recently, like a year or two ago. That's instead of the first Monday, it's the first. So the first Tuesday after the second Wednesday in December in every state, the winning candidates' political parties' electors, they all meet in the state capitol, and all on the same day across the country in every state, and they all cast 2 votes, one for president, one for vice president, and then those votes are sent. They're certified by the state, and then they send him to Washington, D.C. And as a lot of people probably found out, on January 6th at 1 p.m., the electoral votes are counted in front of the new Congress, which just got seated 3 days earlier. And whoever gets a majority of votes for president, electoral votes, becomes the president. Whoever gets a majority for vice president becomes vice president. And then those people are sworn in on January 20th. At noon. And if nobody gets a majority, like happened to poor Andrew Jackson, then the House picks the president with this weird like one state tiebreaker, right? You need today, it's a majority, 26 states to win. And if that happened for vice president, the Senate would pick the vice president, and it would be, they vote by senator, so not by state. So you need 51 senators to choose the vice president or like there could be a tie. It's possible, like 269 to 269. Or again, some electors, throw their vote away or vote differently, and no one gets to that 270 majority because there's 538 electoral votes. 270 is the smallest majority, so that's why it's the magic number.
And if there's a tie, you do rock, paper, scissors, and then see who wins.
That's how they decided in the House. That's exactly
what I thought.
right. It goes to the House, they do rock, paper, scissors. That's how the state votes. And
the stakes are so high. But so are people, their critique, I feel like a lot of people are like the popular vote doesn't really matter because of the Electoral College vote, but it does because the electoral people, the correct term, are looking at what the popular vote is, right? And they
Absolutely.
are voting based on that. So the
popular
popular
vote in
vote
their state.
of their state.
Of their state. So
Right.
like when people say, the national popular vote doesn't technically matter.
Right.
But the popular vote in each state 100% matters.
It's everything.
It's everything. Yeah.
Yeah.
Whoever wins Wisconsin gets the Wisconsin electors. Whoever
Right.
wins Georgia gets the Georgia electors.
And that's an encouraging thing, when we were talking about before we started recording, a lot of people are like, well, why does my vote matter? What's the point? And that's it right there, that the popular vote really does
It
matter.
drives it.
How do we, and can we get rid of it? And like, what would be that timeline? Is it possible?
Well, also just before that, what are your thoughts on it? Like, do you think it's an effective system? Because I know that we're all kind of like, how do we get rid of it? Which, I mean, I think just like the history of it already, I'm like, it seems so outdated. But is it effective? Is it something that we should get rid of?
Well, I do want to. I'll give the arguments for the Electoral College, right? Again, if it was a national popular vote, you would have candidates just go to the largest cities in the country. They would go to campaign in New York and Los Angeles and Chicago and Houston and Phoenix and Philadelphia and just care about people in the cities. And I think people who are not in cities across rural America would feel like they are not a part of the process. Their vote doesn't matter. Their voice doesn't matter. I would say the counter argument to that is like now swing states are the ones that matter. And so candidates, come to California or Texas for money more than they come to actually try to win votes because those states tend to vote a certain way. So the money that gets spent so the focus is now on the swing states. So either way you look at it, it's kind of, there's some people who are prioritized more than others, right? And then the whole idea with small states, right, is like, just small states having a seat at the table, populations, it's a way to give more representation. And then some people will say that because the system has like 2 rounds of voting and rounds of vote counting, and it makes it harder to hack. Now, obviously, that's not something that was top of mind in 1787 for people who like had never seen an air conditioner, but like
hackers weren't brainstorming.
Right.
Yeah.
They were, like a cell phone would they would be like, that's the devil.
Oh,
like,
they would
throw it away.
They weren't even that religious, but they'd be like, that's for sure Satan.
Totally.
And maybe they're not wrong.
Yeah, maybe they're not wrong.
Yeah,
We'll see. We'll see.
Corporate overlords. But yeah, so they, it makes it harder to interfere, mess with an election if there is this like multiple rounds of voting. There are a few ways to get rid of it or change it, and I will share which of those I like the best. So the first way would be a constitutional amendment, and that is very hard. And the reason that it's hard is because it requires 2/3 of the House to approve it, 2/3 of the Senate to approve it, and 3/4 of states across the country, which is 38. So you would have to get 2/3 of both chambers of Congress and 38 states to be like, let's do this, which has not happened. It happened by accident in an amendment happened by kind of like a weird, I can tell the story if you want, but like a weird fluke in 1992. But the last amendment that like happened in like the real process was 1971. It's been over 50 years.
There's only been one constitutional amendment?
There's been 27.
Oh, okay.
But the one in 1992 is... It's a tangent story. I'm going to tell it really, really fast. Basically, this guy in 1982 was writing a term paper in University of Texas, and he wrote a paper about an amendment that had been proposed that had never been ratified, like approved, but hadn't expired. And it was part of the original Bill of Rights. And he got a C on his paper, and he was mad, and he appealed it, and the teacher upheld the C. And in maybe the best petty story I've ever heard of somebody upset about a grade, he started writing letters to state legislatures across the country who had not ratified the amendment to get them to ratify it. And it worked.
That's iconic.
Oh my God.
And this guy spent 10 years writing letters, and he got enough states to ratify this amendment and make it a part of the Constitution. And the amendment says that a pay change, like members of Congress can't raise their own salaries, an election has to be in between. So like you can't raise your salary and like you get a pay raise tomorrow. You can raise your salary, but then it takes place once the next election has happened.
Oh my gosh, he's like, I'll get the last word.
His name is Gregory Watson. And
isn't that
crazy? Isn't that wild?
Yeah.
Wow. And then I think a couple of years ago he appealed. He like went back to the school and he's like, it's been 36 years. I got you didn't like that paper. I got it to fucking add it to the Constitution. Give me an A+, and they gave him an A.
No way.
Yeah, he didn't even get the plus.
Oh, I love that. He's like
crazy.
Never letting it down.
So so that was like a fluke. But like the last one that was like passed by 2/3 of Congress, ratified by 38 states, was lowering the voting age to 18.
Oh, from 21?
From 21 in 1971.
Is it so rare just because it's really hard to get parties to agree on
It's
things?
so hard. And the amount of agreement. In fact, today, there is one thing that a lot of political parties agree on is that it is too hard to add an amendment to the Constitution. Mm-hmm. It should be hard, but it shouldn't be that hard.
Well, yeah, when something's been around for so long, it's like, let's make it easier to have.
So going back to like the Electoral College part of it, that is the first way you could do it in the Constitution. And there have been 700 amendments proposed in Congress to get rid of the Electoral College. Obviously, none worked. We have changed the Electoral College. So in 1800, because of a catastrophe at the election, it used to be that the person who wins the most votes gets to be president. The second place winner gets vice president. Mm-hmm. And so every elector would purposely like not vote for, have one person vote less for vice president. So like that person would finish second for who they want to bring. But somebody fucked up and they didn't withhold the vote. And so there was a tie. And the person who was supposed to be vice president was like, well, it's going to a runoff in the House. Like, maybe I could be president. And so it created this like catastrophe. It was Thomas Jefferson, Aaron Burr. Aaron Burr was going to be the vice president. And then he's like, president sounds pretty good. It's like, actually, you guys fucked up, but like now I have a shot.
Yeah,
so
this looks good
they voted 35 times. These states could not agree. And then finally they changed and Jefferson won, obviously. So they changed it. So we amended the Constitution in 1804 to be like, we're going to do two separate votes. One for president, a separate one for vice president. So like this doesn't happen again.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
And then and then we changed the Electoral College in 1961. We gave DC 3 electoral votes. Okay. So they get to vote for president since 1961. So we have changed it before, and we almost got rid of it in 1969. That was the closest we ever came. It was filibustered in the Senate, but it had the votes in the House. It had most states. I don't think it was quite 38, but like over 30 states were like, we're ready to get rid of this. Even Nixon was like, Electoral College has got to go.
Oh, really?
So, yeah.
Wow. I guess he had
Now, the
something.
president isn't involved in constitutional amendments. They're actually
Yeah,
not part of the
that makes sense
process.
that this would happen in the 60s.
But 1969, 1970 were super close. I mean, think about it. That period of time was crazy.
I mean,
Four
truly.
constitutional amendments.
That's
Imagine
crazy.
if we had 4 amendments out of the Constitution since 2014. Like, that'd be wild.
Yeah.
So that's the first way. You could change it. You could get rid of it. You could change it. Constitutional amendment. That's like the longest lasting way. The second way is something called the National Popular Vote Interstate Compact, which sounds very boring. But it is an agreement where basically states say, instead of giving our electoral votes to the winner of our state, we're going to give it to the winner of the national popular vote. And so 17 states and DC have agreed to this. And but it doesn't take effect until the total electoral votes of the states that agree reaches 270. So right now, I think it's like 209. So they need a few more states. So that could work. But the issue with that is, if let's say you get to 278, right? Boom, compact takes effect, and you've circumvented the Electoral College, all these states following the popular vote. If a state goes, we don't want to be in this anymore, it goes back below 270, and then the compact is
like
off.
all falls apart.
It goes off, and then you need to, so it's like, it's not a very long lasting way to affect it. It's possible, but it could be like, it's kind of flimsy.
So you can't be like, you're in, you're locked in.
Exactly.
If you decide.
I mean, unless every state is like, we're in, we're not falling out, but like, new people get elected to governor or whatever, and they're like, we don't want to be a part of this. We want to follow how the people in our state vote. So it could go away. But that is a whole movement. There are people who really believe in this and are like, this is the way to fix it. A third way out of 4 is we could increase the size of the House. So ever since 1929, we've been locked at 435 members of the House, and the population has continued to grow. So now we have like way more people per representative than we used to. If we increase the number of people in the House, that would increase the number of electoral votes in different states. And so people in larger states would actually get more electoral votes, but it would be more in proportion to the population. So it wouldn't be like, your vote for president in Wyoming as a regular person is like 3 or 4 times more powerful than your vote as a regular person in Texas. Like, it would be more even.
Which could represent what the state wants more, correct?
Totally.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it would represent what the state... I don't know if it would represent what the state wants more. It would make it so that, like, instead of 760,000 people in Texas getting 1 electoral vote, it would be a smaller number, closer to that, like the 190,000 people in Wyoming getting 1. So it would be less of an imbalance between states. But that brings me to the 4th way, which is my favorite, is why don't we just give the electoral votes proportionally? If you win 60% of the state, you get 60% of the electoral votes instead of 100. If you win 50.1% right now of Massachusetts, you get all of Massachusetts' electoral votes. There's nothing about this in the Constitution. This is up to any state. Any state tomorrow could be like, instead of winner take all, we're going to do proportional. Not only would it be more accurately reflecting the electorate, the people in their state, so no one in California can say, oh, my vote, if I'm a Republican, my vote doesn't matter because the state, well, there are more Republicans in California than any state in the country. So suddenly that would make electoral votes in California matter for Republicans. Same thing for Democrats in Texas.
That was like shocking to hear almost. I was
Yeah,
like, wait, what?
yeah, but I mean, it makes sense.
There's more Republicans in California than any other state.
for sure.
And
Yeah.
if I were, I'm a registered independent, but if I was a Republican voter in California, I'd be mad. But proportional votes, and it also makes every state now competitive because people write off states. It's like, oh, that's a blue state, that's a red state. It's like, no, depending on what share of the vote you get in every state, suddenly you'll be shot at electoral votes in every state. Right now, there are 2 states that do something a little bit differently than this winner take all thing. It's Maine and Nebraska. And Maine and Nebraska do the system where the winner of the state gets 2 electoral votes for like the 2 senators, and then the winner of each House district gets 1. So you can split votes, right? So if you win like Maine's 2nd, so like a Republican usually wins Maine's 2nd district. So like, someone from the state gets 3 votes, one person gets 1. In Nebraska, it's a largely red state, but Nebraska's 2nd district is like, I think, Omaha. And so it usually goes Democratic. So you can split a little bit. I don't like that system because then it like opens it up to gerrymandering, which is a whole other conversation. But I do think that it is a very easy fix. It doesn't require 38 states to change the Constitution. It doesn't require some big federal law. It's literally, you know, Iowa tomorrow could be like, yeah, we're going to go proportional. Just pass a state law and boom, it's changed. And that's a fix that anyone could do in any state, anytime. And it's so logical. But I think what happens is like political parties want the power of the winner take all. And also being a swing state brings in a lot of money. A lot of money, like millions and millions and millions of dollars of candidates coming to try to get, you know, all the electoral votes that are seen as a prize. They spend millions of dollars on, you know, hotels and transportation. Obviously, TV time is the biggest thing. But proportional electoral votes is such an easy fix, like logistically. And I just don't think people think about it as like a thing. And by the way, the people who wrote the Constitution fucking hated winner take all. The ones that were still alive when we moved to winner take all, like James Madison and others, were like, you're basically saying that 45% of voters like don't like of the electors don't have a say. Like this is not the vote. They were, you know, obviously talking about more of the electors, but like a state has, you know, it shouldn't just be winner take all. You're like disenfranchising a lot of ideas and stuff in the state. And so, yeah, it was never supposed to be like this. And it's not something that requires a big fix. It's just a state law. Or changing the state constitution, which is like not that hard to do.
Wow. I mean, that's good to know because I thought it was like not that simple, you know?
But is it just hard to do? Because again, like
you're fighting political parties. You're
exactly.
fighting because the
And
state
and power and money.
But that's the thing is like, you know, getting involved at your local level, your like city level, county level, state level, like there's a lot of power there. Like you think that it's like, oh, it's not the president. It's like, no, getting involved at your state level means that you affect like the presidency. You can change how your state gives electoral votes and that can change who wins.
Yeah.
There'll be a huge difference. If Republicans suddenly had, you know, 20 electoral votes in California, 25 electoral votes in California on the table, that's a lot. That's I mean, that would be what, the fourth most electoral votes of any state right now? I mean, that's a huge amount. And same thing for Democrats in Texas. Like it would so easily fix so many things, and it's not a hard thing to do, but I just don't think a lot of people are aware of it because I definitely could see states doing this at some point.
That was very informative
I know.
and hopefully inspiring, you know, like, because it's all, like you just said, it's all getting involved locally first, which I know can sometimes sound like, what does that even mean? But this is a very good example of that, how it can just affect the bigger picture.
And how your voice, like, it does matter.
God, I mean, look at the presidential election in 2000 was decided by like what 537 votes in Florida.
I'll never forget that
I
night
mean,
in like fourth
you know,
grade.
and like there are local races that are decided by like one vote. You know, like there's just it's not that it's not that any level of government has less power. It just has a smaller area of power that it wields. So like I think we just start thinking about it like that. It's like it's not that my city council has less power than the federal government. It's just they affect a smaller space. But I live in that space. And so it affects me just as much as the federal government.
Yeah, that's a good perspective shift.
You know?
Yeah, that's a great perspective shift.
Well, speaking of elections.
Yes, and things that I think we're not really clear on what they are, but we've been hearing talks about
Yeah, we have a lot of questions about like, let's just get into
this year.
Our candidates, and I think we had a lot of questions about, you know, Harris versus Trump. First of that being a big one of what is Project 2025? What the hell is
What the hell has it been?
It's really long.
what
It's
is
like
that
900
even?
pages
Yeah.
or 700 pages.
What are the
something like
main points that voters need to know when or if Trump is associated with it?
So that's a big one, is that he's come out recently and said that he is not he is no longer endorsing Project 2025. He's not a part of it. Project 2025, just to take a step back, is a manual, a large, long manual of what a sort of an ideological conservative movement on the right would like to have enacted with the next Republican president, who obviously we're talking about this before an election year, it would be Donald Trump if he wins. So these think tanks and you know, policy specialists, they put together this huge manual. I mean, this is like dozens, if not hundreds, of organizations and individuals involved in this thing, and they basically did this wish list of how they would want to remake the federal government and how they would want to get certain policies passed, maybe not through Congress, just through like executive action or the executive branch. So the Heritage Foundation is behind it. That's a 40-year-old think tank, Republican think tank, maybe 50 years old. But basically, it's a series of ways to kind of make the president have more power of the executive branch. And so the idea is that right now there are about, I want to say, 1,200 to 1,800 jobs that the president hires. Like the president like approves to hire in the federal government, the heads of agencies, and a lot of those require Senate confirmation. So like the head of the EPA, the head of the Treasury Department, the head of the Attorney General, whatever. These are things that the Senate has to approve. And I think in total, the president has the power to hire like 4,000 people directly. But there's millions of people who work in government. So like the people under them hire them. So it brings an additional like 50,000 plus people under the president's, purview, I guess. And so the president can fire and hire way more people. And the idea is that if those people are standing in the way of some sort of presidential action, that the president could remove them and replace them with somebody who would be more willing to enact a policy proposal. For example, getting rid of the Department of Education is in Project 2025. The Department of Education funds a lot of public education initiatives, public schools around the country, and Project 2025 says that they would want to get rid of the Department of Education. Not amend it, not change it.
Get rid of it.
Get rid of it.
And why would they want to?
That's a great question. I believe, from what I have read and put together, is that they think that public education today is indoctrinating people with liberal, left-leaning values, and they do not want that, and they want to have public education more impartial. Public education is something that's run at the state level. The federal government does not decide what you learn. It doesn't have the power to say, hey, Mississippi, you have to teach this. It can offer money to states to teach things. So it can say, if you start a civics program, we'll give you, $1 billion over 10 years or whatever to do this. But it doesn't have the power to decide what people learn. So, but it does fund a lot of programs for like disadvantaged kids, underprivileged kids, low-income kids. It helps supplement funding in poor states and communities. Without the Department of Education, that money would go away. So that's one thing that's proposed. There's a lot of like anti-trans stuff in there, encouraging either the federal government or anyone else to, remove any sort of protections or anti-discrimination things for trans people. It's a 900-page proposal of a lot of political positions that would be characterized as conservative and to be honest, are pretty extreme.
I would say so.
And there's been a lot of pushback of people sort of discovering this. I mean, a big thing is that they also kind of are putting together this like LinkedIn. It was Sharon McMahon, who goes by Sharon Says So. It was a great follow on Instagram. Talked about this. It's basically like they created this like conservative LinkedIn of people to hire, because it's also, if you're firing all these people from the federal government, you need people to replace them with, and that's not easy. It doesn't just happen. And so like they're building a database of people who have pledged to follow, whatever the Republican president wants to do with Project 2025, so that you could easily hire from them. There's training videos. I was watching a training video the other day that was really, regardless of ideological bent, the production value of this training video was incredibly subpar. And you would think, because like Republicans tend to have a lot more money and are good at business, whatever, like they could have done a better job with producing it. So this is not an ideological criticism. This is a production value criticism. Whoever's behind Project 25.
He's a producer.
Yeah,
I'm producing like the lighting. It looks like it was like student film 1976, like really poor quality. So I'm just saying, if you want to drive home like the quality value of your ideas, I would say put a little bit more into the production.
Of course.
For sure. Yeah, you guys got the cash.
Yeah.
They definitely have the cash. They have a lot. So it's a mix of policy positions that are all put into, this 900-page, whatever, manual. Now, it has been getting a lot of negative press on social platforms, on TikTok. People are going through and finding things that are, did you know it has this? Did you see this? And it's become this whole kind of movement to expose all of this. And I think as a result of that, Trump has distanced himself significantly from Project 2025. I mean, this is, they also they want to make abortion illegal. They want to pass a national abortion ban. That's part of Project 2025, Congress passing a ban because, what Roe versus Wade being overturned 2 years ago did is that it sent the decision back to the states. There's no baseline protection for reproductive rights at the federal government. It's up each state can either make abortion illegal or give you abortion rights. And they're saying that they actually want to go further. They actually want a national ban.
Mm-hmm.
Jesus. So I feel like there's been a lot of even we're on TikTok and we just see a lot of, Republicans that are like, Trump would never go this far and they feel like they want to defend him with his involvement. How can you sort of confirm his involvement and if he does become president, if he would support it?
Yeah. Is it a true threat to us?
I'll say this. In 2020, or I should say 2016, Trump has always been, he used to be pro-choice for most of his life.
Yeah, you guys can watch the interviews.
Pro-choice.
Yeah.
He was, and I think as a strategy, I don't know if he actually today is pro-life or pro-choice, but I think he is willing. He seems like somebody who was willing to say and hold whatever belief to get elected because he has changed his position significantly in a short amount of time on this. But what he did do is he appointed 3 justices to the Supreme Court, and he ran on this in 2016 to say, if you appoint me, I will appoint people who will overturn Roe v. Wade. And he did. And now that there's a backlash to that, he seems to be distancing himself from that. And he sees what's happening in states, including kind of reddish states like Ohio and Kansas, that are protecting abortion at the state level, even in off-year elections. And he's being like, well, okay, we just took it away. We took away the federal protection. It's up to each state and they can do what they want. But there are definitely people in his party that, want to go further. He has said some pretty extreme positions on abortion before. He has walked them back. So I don't know if he's walking it back because he thinks that the position is too extreme or because he thinks it's bad PR to be that too extreme.
Yeah, he just had a very vague answer about it the other day where he was like, abortion's not going to be an issue anymore. It's like, what does that mean?
It is. I mean, there is nobody, regardless of whether you are happy that Roe versus Wade was overturned, if you're upset about it, there should be zero confusion as to who bears responsibility because the president appointed 3 justices. Donald Trump appointed 3 justices who, by the way, in their confirmation hearings, dodged the question of whether they were going to overturn Roe v. Wade. They said it was established law, it's precedent. Stare decisis is this very fancy Latin term for deferring to past decisions and not, messing with things decided by previous courts, Supreme Courts. And they all lied. Yeah. He said that he was going to appoint justices who would overturn it. He did. They did. And now they're dealing with the consequences of that political decision. That is their thing. They decided they don't like how it was reacted to by people, and especially women across. I mean, everybody across the country, but especially women across the country are pretty upset about it. So, you guys did it. Yeah. So you sleep in the bed you made.
Own it.
Yeah. And Project 2025 does that, and it goes further. And so I think there are definitely some Republicans who clearly are reading the room and are going, this is way too far.
Yeah. But we want people to like us still, so
I mean, so to sum it up, Project 2025 is a plan, and I think that I've heard this before, that some Republicans were upset that Trump didn't have a clear plan when he got into office last time. So a lot of things couldn't be done. So this is taking care of it. We have a clear plan to fire anyone who can police what the president's decisions are going to be. And we can make as extreme of decisions as we want to make.
It basically says that, what they did is last time they wanted to do certain things that there were tens of thousands, if not more, people in the federal government who prevented them. Now, there are people in the federal government who are not partisans. They just served. They've served for 40 years in the Department of Agriculture. They're like specialists in these fields, and so there are certain things where the president didn't have the power to fire that person for not going along with something that that person felt was illegal or against a certain policy that was established. So this is a way to basically remake the executive branch to make it more deferential to the president, who does run the executive branch, but it's sort of taking away like the checks and balances within the executive branch.
You still got to have someone that's like, no, guys, we can't do this.
Yeah, it seems to be opposite of really what our country was based off of.
Right.
And
so
like
just
built off of.
constitutionally even, it sounds a little concerning.
It fundamentally does shift more power to the president, and the people who wrote our Constitution were very concerned about having too much power concentrated for the president because the country they were leaving was a monarchy with a king who was a dick and fucked with them and killed them and did all a bunch of awful shit. And they were like, we don't like that, so we're going to give the power to people. Not all people back then, but it was a revolutionary
some white
idea.
dudes we like.
Yeah.
We'll keep them in the mix.
We have made our country a lot more democratic over time, but like it was a crazy idea at the time to be like, we're going to have people vote people into office. Like the fact that people voted for members of the House, that was like that was a wild idea.
Which some might say is the best part of this country.
Yes.
So to take that away, there are questions there and concerns.
And also the people losing their jobs. It doesn't matter what party they are. It's just going to be people working in the government, correct? Like,
yeah, there's sort of like a purity test. There's like interviews. It's like, are you willing to go along with this? Are you willing to do this? Are you willing to do if the president does this? Like they're like interviewing people in the federal government. They're interviewing people that could replace those people. It's a full reno of the executive branch.
That's scary.
It is. It should be.
And I just want to point out as well that Trump has tried to distance himself. However, there is a photograph with the person who created Project 2025 of them on a private jet together, correct?
Yeah, and I think the person who is the chief architect of Project 2025, J.D. Vance, wrote like the foreword for his book. I mean, like there's definitely a lot of interplay between the former president, the current vice presidential nominee for the Republicans, and Project 2025. Whether or not they are going to own up to any of it or endorse any of it between now and the election is it seems unlikely. I think they've seen the negative press it's gotten and they've really made an effort to distance themselves from it. But the receipts are all out there. So
the receipts are out there.
And that's all you need, right?
That's true.
I think this is a good transition to ask you what Trump's plans are in terms of, we can even do like a little rapid fire maybe of like immigration, healthcare, the economy. I think those are, we already talked about reproductive rights. What's his plan? What's he going to do as president for the next 4 years?
He has, he released on his website, you can go and look at his full list of, I think it's 20 or 25 things that he wants to do. There's a lot around immigration. There's a lot around trade. One of his biggest, I say accomplishments just in like a functional way, not as like a celebratory way, is that he passed a massive tax cut in 2017, the Tax Cut and Jobs Act, I think it was called. That was a huge tax break for wealthy individuals and corporations. And so you can see the list of policies on his website and go through and evaluate for yourself. And I would, he also has a list of the things that he did when he was president last time. And so I think, I know, the youngest people who were of voting age this year were 10 when Trump was elected in 2016. Which is pretty wild to
That's great.
think
Tough
about.
to hear, Ben. It's tough to hear.
It is tough to hear. It's tough to say.
Yeah.
But yeah. So like I encourage people to like really do their own, and I don't mean like just like Google random. Like these policy positions are on the Republican Party website. They're on the former president, now current Republican nominee's website. I encourage you to read them and see if they sound good for yourself. But there's a lot around immigration. There's a lot around trade. And there's, talking about how he's going to, affect inflation with trade policies. But I would I would just read them and make a decision. The same with Harris, who just
Yeah.
put out an economic plan. You know, one of the things she wants to do is give first-time home buyers I think a tax credit or money for a down payment. I think it's like $25,000, something like that. And you know, she hasn't put out as many. She's been running for president for a much shorter time period than Donald Trump, so she has not put out the full scope of what she wants to do, but she is starting to. And I imagine, you know, we're taping this a few days before her speech at the DNC. I imagine that is where she's going to roll out her big plans for the next 4 years.
I know. We are recording at such an interesting time because
so much could change.
Yeah, so it will be interesting when this episode comes out next week where we are, what we know.
Yeah, and I don't think we actually have this question on, but it's something that we've been talking about a lot that relates to this. A lot of Republicans are like, I vote Republican or I'm going to vote for Trump because of the economy. And that's their kind of like one single issue voter thing of like, we're going to get more rich. It's going to help me if I vote Republican. What is that? Why do people think that? Like, I genuinely don't know why that's kind of like...
That's the big thing.
That's the big thing.
Well, I don't know. The Republican Party has done a good job of branding itself as like the party of fiscal responsibility. But if you go back and look at how the stock, just as an example of the stock market, right? There's a lot of different economic indicators. It's hard to say the economy was better. So what are you talking about? Are you talking about jobs? Are you talking about interest rates? Are you talking about the stock market? It's a lot in the economy. It's not just like one thing. So, you know, the current president has done a really good, has created a lot of jobs. The stock market, if you go back, tends to do better under Democratic presidents. It's not my opinion. That's just that if you go back a couple decades, like that's just how it's been. So it depends what you're talking about. If you're talking about whether or not people in the upper tax brackets are going to pay less money in taxes, I would say yes. Under a Republican president, that's going to happen. That's what happened in 2017. That is definitely a policy position. This idea that, you know, saving people money at the top 1% or 0.1% of society is somehow going to trickle down. Like, it's possible, but I don't think it does, because wealth inequality has gotten way worse over time. And when people have more money at that level of the economy, they tend to invest it in assets. They don't necessarily hire more people. Some of them do, but I think it's putting a lot of faith in the richest people in the country that they're going to do the most responsible thing to create wealth for other people. And that's not always the case.
Yeah, we don't see it quite trickle down.
So I would say, you know, it's important to vote for, and like the economy tends to be something like I've really changed my opinion recently about how younger voters are perceived in this election. And there tends to be this idea that like older voters care about the economy and younger people care about climate change and gun violence. Like, yes, we do. And I'm still in my 30s for the time being. So like we do care about that. But like, we also care about money. We also care about a rent. We also care about the price of gas and groceries. We just don't have to deal with money concerns, and we care about the fucking climate. Like, that's important.
We'd all like to buy a house too one day.
Yeah. If you go and ask, you know, I was part of a research project recently of young voters in swing states, and it was Democrat, Republican, Independent, Black, white. I mean, all a very, very wide group of younger voters, but the only commonality was they were under 30. And the number one issue in every single of these polls was cost of living. It was the concerns around inflation. It was concerns around not paying rent. It was concerns around groceries and gas. And like, this is the number one thing. There were people who either knew someone who had been homeless, or there were people who had been homeless in these focus groups. And it is really, really hard. Like wages have not kept up. Like, we need a fucking higher minimum wage. We need wages to keep up. The wages have not kept up with the price of housing or the supply of housing. And it is creating a situation where a lot of people I'm a millennial, barely, but I am, in my generation and Generation Z, like, do not have the propensity to buy a home. And that is not something that is their fault. It is wages have not kept up. It's simple math. And so this is a huge issue, and I find it frustrating when like older people come in and is like, oh, we'll do something with the climate. It's like, younger people like to fucking have money and be able
Feels
to
good.
afford a family and a home too. So
Yeah.
like maybe think of them in that way. It's not just like a fun issue. Like they're even treated like pet issues, like for
Yeah,
like
it's
kids.
so true.
And it's fucking annoying. And the data doesn't back that up. I mean, it's not that people don't care about that. I mean, they do, but it is like the number one issue in this election is cost of living, and nothing else is close. Maybe reproductive rights. It's the only issue that head to head in a poll that we did with my friend John Della Volpe, who runs polling at Harvard and is an incredible pollster who spent 20 years of his career, if not more, just listening to the concerns of younger voters. There's nobody who's better at taking the temperature and the insights of younger voters. And I watched his focus groups with younger people in Philadelphia and in Arizona and in Atlanta and Detroit, whatever, so on and so forth. And like it is really, I never thought I would be like emotional watching a focus group, but I was. There were people breaking down and talking about like how hard life is, and like so grateful that somebody is listening to them and then broadcasting their feelings and sentiments, you know, into the larger world so that politicians take note.
Yeah.
It's a really important thing to listen to younger people because they get passed over a lot. And so this is what's happened. People, you know, number one issue is cost of living. A close second is, you know, reproductive rights. I mean, all these issues are important, but this is, I think these are the two things that are defining the election this year is cost of living and reproductive rights and freedoms.
And I think our listeners, you know, would agree with that. And I know that's a concern for so many of you. And so, you know, we just urge you to really do your research and not just kind of like assume that one party is going to
Help
get
the
you
other.
there and help you there.
Because just to follow up on that, so Trump's tax break was for the wealthy, correct? So just making sure that they don't get taxed as much. Or that
Yeah, it was a tax break so that wealthy individuals and corporations didn't have to pay as much in taxes.
But not touching middle class, like not helping middle class or lower economic status out. Okay. Yeah, I was just like confirming that.
I mean, that's a great question. That's
Yeah.
a valid question. And that's something that you know, we need
If
to
it was,
pay
if it
close
was
attention to.
maybe marginally, a
Because-
small amount, but it was a tax break for businesses and wealthy individuals. The idea being that it would stimulate growth in the economy,
Right.
But you
Kind
know,
of just sounds like words at that point.
Yeah,
you know?
because again, they're not going to take it and give it out
Yeah.
to people.
And they do
that are-
present it in the way that that is what they're going
I think
to
it's
do.
it's. Do you, I mean, ask your, you know, Rammies, ask yourself, like, do you trust people in that position to share their resources?
Yep.
Yeah. Do you know anyone like that?
Maybe
Yeah.
some people do. Look,
Yeah,
it's not
I mean,
every rich
truly.
person is bad. It's not.
Of
It's not like
course.
It's
No.
like there are, you know, really amazing people out there who do great work and are
100%.
ethical. But it is, you know, largely saying like we're going to give you a bunch of money and just hope that you do the right thing.
Because when anyone gets a chunk of money, I mean, listen, when I see how much of my taxes are taken out, it's like, ooh, but you have to remind yourself of what that is for. You
Exactly.
know?
It is hard to see that first little.
So I don't blame anyone
Cut.
being like, ouch, but also
Putting your
people
trust in-
can
yeah.
afford to give more.
Elizabeth Warren has said something, and I'm going to botch this quote, so I'm just going to vaguely approximate what I remember of what she said. But she said something that there's no such thing as a self-made person. It doesn't exist. And the reason it doesn't exist is because unless you went to private schools your entire life, there's a good chance that at some point you went to a school that was paid for by tax dollars. There's a good chance that you drive on roads and bridges that are paid for by tax dollars. All these things that have allowed you to live the life that you live are paid for by tax dollars. So no, you didn't do everything yourself. You paid into, or someone else paid into, a system that you have benefited from. Everyone benefits in some way from our tax dollars. So the idea of like completely self-made and never had to, you know, have anything from the government, like, it's just not true. Do some people get more government assistance? Yeah, of fucking course. But like, look at the thing, you know, the government is like, when it's working, nobody gives a shit. When it's going badly,
Yeah.
everyone pays attention. No one is celebrating like, man, I drove over that fucking amazing bridge. That bridge was so sick. That bridge is great. That bridge is passed by tax dollars. Like, we don't think of it like that. It's just like
That's
we
my brother,
assume
actually.
Yeah.
like government working well for people is like the bare minimum. And if any deviation is like, you know, gets a ton of attention. But even things that the government does effectively, they also don't get attention. And this is the problem with our media, is that fear and outrage and division get way more attention and clicks and
Yep.
listeners than solutions.
the
And
headlines.
when we talked about in these focus groups, we were talking about some of the things that have happened in the last 4 years under the Biden administration, just to take their temperature and awareness, right? almost no one in these focus groups had any idea that $400 billion had been put toward green energy and fighting climate change, which is the most ever of any government in the history of the world.
Wow.
There have been over 5 million people who have had their student loans forgiven, a total of $167 billion. That's like 1 in 10 people who have student loans have had their student loans wiped. I did interviews with people on my Instagram. I just did a poll. I was like, has anyone had their student loans forgiven? A bunch of people did. And we did an ad for government effectiveness, just to show people that, like, because young people voted in 2020, the result of that was student loan forgiveness. Now, it wasn't just young people that had their loans forgiven, but like 5 million people had their lives changed from the government and their student loans wiped because of how the election went in 2020. There was a gun law. Believe it or not, a gun law was passed in 2022, a bipartisan Safer Communities Act. And this did things like increased funding for red flag laws. It strengthened background checks. It raised the purchasing age for certain types of guns to 21 from 18. And there have been hundreds of people who have been prevented from getting guns who should never have had them because of this law. But that's not on the front page of the fucking New York Times or whatever. You know, the first African-American woman ever appointed to the Supreme Court happened in the last few years. A first Native American member of a cabinet who overseeing a department that used to, like, years ago subjugate Native Americans. Like, there's a lot of interesting things that have happened that I think align with the values of younger generations, including my generation, millennials, but no one has any fucking clue about it because our media doesn't talk about government when it's working. Now, some people may hear that and go, well, that's not working. That's a problem. That's bad. Okay. But, like, these things just don't get the same level of coverage as dysfunction and fighting.
Yep.
And that is something to remember, is that there is a profit incentive to focus on the negative and not the positive, and both exist.
That's a great point.
Yeah. And it's also just really scary because the media, it benefits them to cause division and fear and all of that.
Like Rammies, you know, do your homework too. Think of the things that are important to you, what will affect you, what has affected you. Do your research from the past 4 years, and do your research of what you hope the next 4 years will be like for yourself.
And it's also not, and it's a great point, and it's also not like, you know, try to look at reliable sites. Also try to look at things from, like, a balanced perspective. You know, I'm going to shout out a newsletter that I really like called Tangle. And what it does is it does one issue a day. And it's an email newsletter. And it covers it from the conservative standpoint. It covers it from the liberal standpoint. And it covers it at the end from the author's standpoint. And he's a pretty center guy.
Oh, that's great.
But it really gives a wide a wide cross section of views on different issues. And I think it's really fair and balanced. And he has conservatives who read it, liberals, whatever. But try to find really good resources and cross check. And it doesn't take, it sounds like a lot of homework, but it really isn't that much. Like, go take 5 minutes and look at President Trump's platform. Take 5 minutes, look at Kamala Harris's platform. Look at, you know, it's not as much work as it sounds for something that is going to have a massive effect on your life.
Can you give a few quick, like, websites or Instagrams to go to for people that just kind of don't know where to start?
Tangle is great. It's an email newsletter. Tangle. I really like, if you have a very short attention span, like I do.
You're saying.
I also get Axios is a really good kind of center newsletter every day with sort of, they do a morning letter news in morning and night.
AXIUS?
AXIOS, yeah.
OS, okay.
Axios. Started by the people who founded Politico originally. And it's just quick stuff. It's easy to consume. It's not going to take a lot of your time. It's sort of like the big hits of the day. And yeah, I mean, those are two. If I would start there, my Instagram.
Yeah,
yes,
shout it out.
But I try to keep it pretty more education,
You
nonpartisan.
are great at that.
balanced.
You
know,
are.
it's like for the Rammies that are not sure or feel a little conflicted, Ben will present it from a, you know, impartial but very informed standpoint. You always talk about the bigger picture, both sides.
Yeah, and I think it's like, you know, it's not like I don't have my own bias. Like, obviously I have my own opinions, but what I try to do really, and I do this in my book as well. What does the Constitution actually say? It is available wherever books are sold. But I try to, you know, I offer my opinion in the book. I would go, here's what I believe, but it's not my opinion that, like, senators serve 6-year terms. Basic information that is the vast majority of the book, and then I like in a section called IMO, give my own take, and you can agree with it, you can disagree with it, but the point is it's supposed to be a jumping off point for conversation.
I think that's so important. Something that I am trying to really learn and implement in my life, because a lot of these things are hard not to get defensive over, and it's hard not to find your identity and even a party. And I think we actually all do. And I think we're seeing that on states voting for things like reproductive rights, even though I have my opinion that it should, be a constitutional right, that we agree on more things than not. I think that's really important.
Well said. And there's time, like we have a couple months until the election. I'm trying to think of, in terms of time, one more question, you think?
I think one that I think is very important. I know that we have a lot of people that are in college, our college Rammies. We love you guys. They are asking about absentee voting. If you can give more insight on that, of how it works.
Yeah, so every state is, it sounds like a cop-out, but it's true. Every state is different, right? They have their own rules around in-person voting, absentee voting, early voting. The vast majority of states allow for early in-person voting. A lot of states, if you can't do it, vote by mail. The best resources I would look up is probably your secretary. Every state has a secretary of state or a state elections person. That website is going to have the most accurate, up-to-date information. So you can search, whatever. If you're in Michigan Secretary of State election info, something like that.
Mm-hmm. Oh,
you will get your Secretary of State's website. It will give you all the information you need to know about how to vote in your state. And that is true for Republicans, Democrats, whatever. That is like the best resource. Now, there are some national organizations that try to collect this data and provide it. Vote.org is a big one, and sites like Rock the Vote, Head Count, More Than a Vote. A lot with sort of similar sounding names, but they all kind of are in the education on how to vote space. But if you want to know the information that is most pertinent to you and the most up to date, usually, and most accurate, I would go to your own state's website. Usually your Secretary of State, or if you want to be super specific about it, look up your county. Look up your county, whatever county you're in, county registrar, county clerk, and go to that website. That'll have election info too.
My final question would be, what would you say to someone who's feeling unmotivated to vote in this upcoming election?
I would say that I don't blame you for thinking that, because I understand how somebody can be defeated when it comes to politics. I can understand how somebody can feel like their voice doesn't matter, how their voice feels like a drop in a bucket. But I will say that right now, there are more millennials than any other generation in America. There are more millennials and Gen Z together far away than any generation in America. So younger voters have the numbers. If they showed up in numbers proportional to older voters, they would have more power. So our generations have the numbers to dictate the future of this country. And there's a lot of effort being put in this country to make you angry, make you feel hopeless. But the truth is that you have a lot more power than you think you do. And you have a lot more power at the local level to affect things. You're one in several million when you're voting for president, but you're one in a few thousand when you're voting for, your mayor or your member of the state house or whatever. Those votes really matter. Smaller, there's way smaller turnout. So, there's a phrase, I don't remember who said it, but it's like the further down your ballot you go, the closer you get to your front door.
Mm.
Things that are further down the ballot affect you more directly. And I would say that I don't blame you for thinking that, but you have an opportunity in a couple months to do something about it, to change the direction of this country. And the numbers are on your side. And if people who are under the age of 40 turn out proportional to their numbers, it's it.
We can make shit happen.
You can make things happen.
And how exciting is that?
And in a less poignant, answer or statement, guys, voting is very fun. It feels really good to do something that you're proud of. It is empowering. It is, I wake up with a little pep in my step. You're kind of look at yourself and you're like, I'm an adult that's making decisions for myself, and this feels really good. And it feels nice to be hopeful for a morning or afternoon. And do it with your friends, have a, election night party. Just make it fun until, and sometimes it's not. Sometimes the aftermath isn't what you want it to be, and it can feel very isolating and depressing. But then with that also comes empowerment to make changes.
And these people work for you. You pay their salaries, you pay their benefits, you pay their expenses, you decide if they keep their jobs, you hire them. Like it's weird. At a company, there's like one person who's the boss of many. In government, it's many people who are the boss of a few people. It's the total flip.
Yep.
And so be a boss.
Be a boss.
Voting is sexy.
It is. It is hot.
It is hot.
If you got to fire someone, fucking fire them.
Fire them.
Yeah.
You get to decide.
It feels good, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Well, Ben, thank you so much for this. This is such an important episode for us. It's an important episode for our listeners, and we hope that you guys, just feel more informed and empowered and excited to just start your research. Ben, where can everyone find you?
Find me on Instagram. It's just my name, Ben Sheehan. Find me on TikTok at that Ben Sheehan. And then my book, What Does the Constitution Actually Say, is available wherever books are sold.
And there's exciting things coming up for you.
There is. I get to announce them in a couple of weeks.
That's right.
Well, we can't wait for that. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Ben.
You were always a treat.
Yes. And Rammies, you can follow us at Right Answers Mostly on TikTok and Instagram and YouTube. You can join our premium channel for 2 bonus episodes a month.
And a brand new episode coming for you.
That's right.
A little 2-parter for the next couple weeks. So you can look forward to that.
And we love you guys so much. Thank you so much for listening. Get out there and vote.
Get voting, kids.